Started. My name is Monzy Merza. I'm the Director of Security Markets at Splunk. Some of my friends call me the Minister of Defense, maybe because I spent a good 15 years of my life working in a government agency, did a lot of interesting work, doing cybersecurity research work, kind of an oddball in a marketing organization, given that I've built tools for a whole bunch of different use cases for my last organization, and also at Splunk, doing a lot of research work on cyber defense and attack tactics and adversary modeling and so on. I want to get a little show of hands so I can get a sense of the room. How many people in the room are practitioners? Or you're a security analyst, or you have your hands on the keyboard most of the day, working on stuff? Okay, quite a few people. How many people are managers? Or CISOs or managers of security organizations? So for those of you who didn't raise your hand, what do you do? No, seriously, I mean, are you an executive, or are you not necessarily related to the security operations, or you're maybe in finance or accounting or something, or some other architect? I'm sorry? Architect. Architect. So IT architect, security architect, both? Security architect. Okay.
Security analyst.
Security analyst? Cool. Anybody else?
Sales engineer with the other product line.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Awesome. So today I want to talk about a couple different things. Hopefully we can keep it short. We have about 45 minutes for this session, of which we already burned 8 minutes trying to set up and doing computers. And I want to cover 3 very specific things. And as I talk through these things, a lot of what I'm going to talk about is not necessarily from the perspective of Splunk, which is where I work, but also from the perspective of my research work and a lot of other things that I do in collaboration with other partners and Splunk customers. But as you look through these things, don't necessarily look at it from the lens of a product or another. Look at it from the lens of the problem, which is what we're challenged with. The first thing I want to do is describe a little bit about what I believe an advanced attacker is and how I look at it from a practitioner's lens and what that means. And everybody has heard a lot of things about what an advanced attacker is in the news and so on, or people define it differently. So I feel it's important to describe it in some terms, so we have a definition set. And then I want to talk a little bit about the requirements of what's required in terms of a system or in terms of a strategy to be able to tackle such an adversary or such an attacker. And the last thing that I want to cover is to give you something very, very specific that you can do when you go back to your own organizations and be able to implement something that's useful. So I will kind of break up the talk in terms of a little bit of front matter, some strategy, and a little bit of a framework, and then something very, very specific. And then my goal is to have at least 10 to 15 minutes towards the end to have some questions. And if you have questions in the middle, please, you're welcome to raise your hand or just say something as I'm talking. So the frame of reference I want to set in terms of the attacker is the following. When we look at some of the results from analysis work that's been done by folks like Mannion, who look at lots of different breaches and incidents, or we look at the Verizon Business Reports or other organizations who compile statistics on breaches and cybersecurity incidents, we learn a few things from those. The first thing is this 229 number. That's the average number of days that it takes for an organization to discover that they've been breached, post-breach. So a very negative way of looking at it would be to say, today is 229 days from the day that one of us is going to discover that we've been hacked. So that's an incredible number in terms of just the amount of time it takes for organizations to discover things. The second thing is the number 40 represents the average number of machines that an adversary compromises, that an attacker compromises to create launch points within your organization. So it's not hundreds, it's not thousands. If you have an organization that has 10,000 systems or 20,000 systems, the attacker has footholds in only 40. And that 40 is what's used to go across the rest of your organization, collect whatever needs to be collect and take the actions on the intents of the attacker, and then conduct the operation from the attacker's perspective. 100% are the credentials. This is important because if 100% of the time an attacker is using known, good, valid credentials in your organization, well, that means it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to find this attacker. Because there is no other way to look at it, right? We look just like you and me as an ordinary user. And the last number is 67, and you can kind of see it in the image. Somebody's whispering something to someone else. 67% of the time, another way to look at it, 67 is about 2/3. 2/3 of the time, someone else outside of the organization is telling the organization that it's been breached. 2/3 of the time. So 229 days on the one side, where it takes so long, that's almost 7 months, I think, 7.5 months, to someone else telling us. So what does that say? Well, it says that an organization is breached. It's going to be breached for a long period of time. We're going to lose a lot of data. Lots of bad things are going to happen. Probably going to be in the newspaper before the organization itself figures it out. And then someone else is going to report to the organization that something bad happened. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So the question then is, okay, so I get it. This is bad. We all know it's bad. You didn't necessarily need a lecture on that. The question is then, how does this attacker manifest itself? And how is it that we can kind of start to think about it from a reference point of being able to combat this stuff? So imagine a compromise through a malicious PDF. You have some attacker puts a malicious PDF inside of an email, sends out the email. The user receives the email, doesn't know what it is, and then the system is infected as a result of that email. And then at some point later, that system starts to perhaps exfiltrate information out of the organization, and the attacker has the contents of whatever it was that was on that system. And maybe in the middle of all this, from this machine, you go out to the attacker goes out to some other. All this processing that's going on, it may involve more than one system. But at the end of it, the attacker has this content that the attacker's interested in. So far, so good? Yes? Okay. So if we look at that, we say, okay, so how could we have at least observed, not prevented, not detected, what are the points of observation, of visibility that we could have in our organization to be able to see this attack in progress? Well, one place that we can see it is on the network, right? Where the email is coming in. If we were watching our email traffic, we could see this bad and malicious email come into the organization. If we were capturing information from our endpoints, we can see that someone else was on that endpoint, or we can see a new process was created on this endpoint, and something new got dropped onto this computer or computers. And then if we were watching if we had access to be able to combine our access and identity systems with the network and the endpoint systems, we would then be able to figure out, well, maybe it's Monzy's computer, or maybe it belongs to HR, or whatever. So we can combine that information. So there's sort of this underlying theme of saying, well, there's event data, and then there is this other business information that we need to apply to the event data so that we can get a broader context of what's actually happening in the environment. And lastly, perhaps if we had some threat intelligence, we had some mechanism of absorbing threat intelligence. Remember the 67% person who's whispering something to someone else, right? That's somebody else telling you that you have something, here's a list of things that are bad, things to look for. So if we had a capacity to ingest that threat intelligence from the outside, then maybe we could match these things together, maybe not in flight, but perhaps after the fact or very close to the time when it actually happens. How many people in the room actually subscribe to some threat intelligence feeds? You guys are familiar with the term threat intelligence? Some people are saying no. Okay, so this is fair. I appreciate the honesty, right? So threat intelligence are organizations who look at the internet, they look at bad behavior, or they observe traffic on the internet, and from those observations derive some quality of known bad actors. So if I am a spammer, for example, and I send a lot of spam, maybe someone in the ISP world sitting out there can see me sending all this spam. You can't see it as an individual organization, but someone at a broader level can look at all the different organizations. And those companies will sell you threat intelligence to say, well, Monzy is a spammer, somebody else is a spammer. And so there are paid sources of threat intelligence, and there's a lot of free sources of threat intelligence. If you Google for the term Zeus, there are multiple organizations that from where you can download free threat intelligence on the Zeus tracker. Zeus, if you're not familiar with it, is a financial crime web where they are infiltrating systems for the purpose of stealing credit card information, personally identifiable information. Individuals as well as organizations have been compromised with Zeus for several years now. So what have we learned? So just kind of coming back to this example, right? We learned that if we have visibility in the network, in the endpoint, access and identity systems, and perhaps that's some threat intelligence, we can get some better visibility. We're good? We have a little bit of agreement on that? Yes? Okay. So let's look at another example. Let's look at an insider threat example. You have a person, potentially, who walks into a certain location in a building, uses a bad swipe, and gets into a particular area, maybe an area that he may or she may have not accessed before or is not usually expected to access, and then goes in and conducts some activity and takes some document, right? All of you have heard in the news the recent cases for any number of these types of attacks as well. The most popular one being in the case of Edward Snowden, where you have an insider who goes in and takes something from the organization and then publishes it to the internet. Politics aside, at the end of the day, it's an insider who's taking something from the organization. So in that case, what kind of information would we need? We're talking about visibility still, right? What is the kind of information that might give us some hints? Well, the business systems might give us some information. So as an example, we saw in the prior slide, a lot of studies show that within 30 days of being notified of being fired, people steal information from the organization. So if we had a mechanism to connect the HR system with the event data that's coming from the authentication systems, then we can put those two pieces together. Or maybe from the travel database, or from other information, so if somebody didn't get a promotion, or they didn't get a raise, or from time management system, maybe someone's committing time card fraud. So it's not just about, Bob didn't swipe this morning at his building door, but yet he charged 4 hours on his time card for today. And Bob doesn't have a laptop. He's not a remote worker. He comes into work every day. He has to work from his workstation, but he's still charging time. Why is that? So the other underlying theme, in addition to visibility, is this capacity to be able to connect things, to be able to connect the dots. So if we go back to our prior example of the PDF, where are the breadcrumbs of being able to know what's going on? Well, maybe somebody brute forced something, and that information lies in the endpoint data. Or someone stole, or somebody copied a document, that lies in the endpoint data. Or as we follow this track from the bullet points, right, maybe what happened was the first time we see it is when we see the network traffic, when we see the email actually coming into the environment. Or maybe we see it when we put it together with the asset information, or maybe we see it when the information is actually exfiltrated. The point is that we don't know when we're going to see it if we have gaps in our visibility. So if we see it at the first point, we see when it's being stolen, that's early on in the attack. If we see it when it's being exfiltrated, that's very late in the attack, right? So it could be anywhere. So we really need a system to be able to put those pieces together. And we can't look at these systems from the perspective of it's a SIM, or I need something for insider threat, or I need this other tool to do network monitoring, or I need to do this other thing for forensics investigation. I mean, it's painful just to talk about it in lockstep and off to the side, right? Imagine we do this every single day. And we get stuck in these arguments about this data or big data or whatever data. But the point is that this data is scattered everywhere and we can't put these pieces together. Anybody share that experience? Am I the only one with that experience? Yeah, there's a few of you nodding. So what are then the requirements? Now that we see behaviorally sort of what it is that we're interested in, what are the requirements to be able to do that? Well, traditionally, this is what we've done. And everybody and all the experts have told us, you buy a firewall and you have some sort of authentication system and you do your vulnerability scans and you put up an IDS someplace and maybe you have an antivirus or something on your endpoints and you're good. That is good. I'm not criticizing that. But that is not all of it, right? Given our prior two examples, It actually looks a little bit more like this. We need a mechanism to be able to bring in a lot of data from a lot of different places and be able to plug it together. And not do it in some kind of a crazy kludgy way. It needs to have other capabilities. We need to be able to not just bring in the actual event information, who logged in where at what time and went to what website. We need to be able to bring context to it. And that context has to come in the form of either an asset management database, so I can say, this is actually Monzy's computer at the time this IP address was used. We need to have employee information to say, yes, this person is supposed to be surfing sites to figure out how to make explosives because he worked for a national laboratory and that's what he does for a living. But maybe somebody else isn't supposed to do that because they're in finance. Or to be able to bring in threat intelligence. Some of my colleagues in the field, and myself included, when I was working as a researcher, we would subscribe to tens of threat intelligence sources, tens, because we wanted as much coverage as we could possibly get. So we just didn't need a system that can take one source of threat intelligence. We needed a system that can bring in threat intelligence from a lot of different places, be able to deduplicate it. We wanted to be able to apply to other sets of information. We wanted to be able to weight it. Because when we had our friends at DARPA tell us something, it had one value in our mind, and when we got downloaded something from something that was free off the internet, it had another value in our mind, right? And so likewise, if you work with other institutions, whether it's the financial services institutions or whether it's the FBI or any other sources of information, those different sets of information mean different things. In addition, you want to bring in context from the business application, just like we saw in the case of the person who was being perhaps fired or laid off, or downsized, or right-sized, or whatever those terms are. And be able to bring that together in any kind of data store, not just in one kind of store. That data could be sitting somewhere in Hadoop, that data could be in a text file somewhere, that data could be in a SQL database. So we need to be able to bring context to the information and the visibility. And once we have that context, just having the data is not enough, right? Everything that we talked about was actually centralized on analysis. So we want to be able to search it. So somebody says, tell me what Monzy did yesterday, so you can just go and search it. Or somebody might say, hey, the next time Monzy does that, I need to know, or someone needs to be alerted, and the appropriate person needs to be alerted. So the system has to have a mechanism of having the capacity to monitor and to alert. And the system has to have a capacity to be able to correlate and analyze the information. Remember to connect the dots? I sometimes use this picture of like 6 blind men and the elephant, right? Where everyone's kind of grasping at different pieces of what's going on in the environment, but then no one's able to put the picture together. But the only way you're going to put the picture together is where you can correlate and analyze all of the data in the way that it's important to you. I might look at it in one way, a network operator might look at it in another way. And then we have to be able to report, right? For the managers in the room, you want to know what's the status right now. And you want to know what the situation is at the current time. As opposed to run some audit, give me a report. When the report comes to your desk, it's dead on arrival. What does that mean? Well, it means that that scan represents something that happened last week. It doesn't represent the current state of the system. And the current state could have changed. And if you have an adversary that's been living in your environment for 229 days, that state probably has changed a lot. And then once you have all of this, you need a system to have APIs and SDKs because this is not the end all. You can't have like these systems that people say, well, this is the end all of all systems. Because you have a business, you've been in business, you've been running a business, you have a mission and an operation to run, and you have existing systems in your environment. And you take advantage of them, whether they're security systems, or they're business systems, or IT infrastructure systems. Someone shouldn't be able to come in and say, oh, in order for you to defend yourself better, you're going to have to just buy this whole huge stack of things, and you're going to have to get rid of everything else. And say, well, what do I do with all this other stuff? Well, we don't really integrate with that, so have a nice day. But it's going to be awesome. So we need this other capability, so that that system is an open system, so that it is integratable. Sound reasonable? Yes? So then what does it really look like, right? If we put all these different pieces together, you've already seen all these pieces. If we put all these pieces together, what we're really desiring for is to be able to bring in all the data from wherever it is that we need to bring it in, and as we can get our hands on it in real time, as it's happening. We want to be able to store it and it's raw form, because we don't want to reduce it, right? Because if we reduce the data, we might lose some fidelity. We do the ad hoc searching on it. Well, if it's reduced and we learn some new threat intelligence, we're not going to be able to apply the new threat intelligence on a data set that's been reduced, because the intelligence information may be gone already. So we got to keep the data in its native form as it comes in. We want to be able to enrich it. We want to be able to bring context to it. And then we want to be able to do all these other things with it, whether it's being able to search it for analysis purposes, correlate it or automate it, whether integrating it with other systems. So that sounds kind of daunting, right? It's like, I don't have a thing like that. That's kind of crazy. How do I start that? So how can you make an immediate impact on doing that, right? So this is, if you're taking pictures of slides, this is the picture that you want. Maybe you want this one too. And the idea is, you don't have to solve the whole world all at one time. You have to look at the problem, and there was an old adage of how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And so what you want to be able to do is look at the spectrum of things that we just talked about and say, okay, I have network information that is incredibly important. We want to bring that data set in. It doesn't have to be super deep. Bring one thing in. You want to get some endpoint data, whether you're bringing in Windows logs, or whether you're bringing in anti-malware, or if you have forensics tools like some kind of like an ETDR, like Carbon Black or Bit9, or any of those agents that sit on the endpoint. You want to bring in threat intelligence information, and you want to be able to bring out identity access information. You're probably already doing this, but it's probably blocked off, and it's not combined together. Because what you really want to get to is something like this, where you know what's going on in your environment at any given point in time, what your posture is, and how you want to be able to respond and make business decisions based on that posture. So I work for Splunk, as we talked about earlier, and so my favorite mechanism of solving this problem is using Splunk. But before you go, aha, I knew it was going to sell me something. I was a Splunk customer for 3 years before I was a Splunk employee. I bought this stuff because it fit the problem. I bought this stuff. I bought Splunk because it allowed me to bring in data from anywhere. It allowed me to enrich that data. It allowed me to bring context to that information. And then it allowed me to be able to analyze and automate and integrate. And when this Splunk person walked in the room, they didn't say, you have to spend $5 billion in doing this. They said, this thing will run on a laptop. And they said, but if you want to run it on a compute cluster, it'll run on a compute cluster too. And I said, I don't believe you. So they said, well, download it. It's free. And so we downloaded it. And a whole bunch of us, but I think world-class researchers, well-resourced, we had every toy in the world. We sat around, we looked at this thing, we said, you know, this actually works. So what did we do with it? What we did with it was we brought in information from our firewall systems, asset and identity systems, packet capture, data store integration, and all of our endpoint data. And then we were able to bring it all together into a single view so that we can take advantage of it and we can visualize that information. So one of the things that we do is that, so look at this chart, right? I had a lot of friends who are satellite guys, and they do a lot of satellite telemetry work, and they do satellite research. So I asked them a very simple question. Things in my mind it was simple, they didn't appreciate it too much. I said, you can detect a tank in the middle of the desert. I said, yes, we can do that. I said, well, what is your degree of confidence that you can accomplish that? I said, very high. How high? Well, I can't tell you, but it's very high. If a tank moves somewhere, we know it moved, and we know it's a tank. Not only that, we know what kind of tank it is. That's pretty awesome. I have another question for you. If I showed you a picture of Waikiki in the middle of summer, the beach, people playing with beach balls, lying with their mats, guys out there, girls out there surfing. And there's these two dudes, big Russian hats, fur coats, boots, walking on the beach. And there's nobody around them. Can you find those two guys for me? I said, no, you can't. Well, why not? Well, because edge detection doesn't work that way. And they said, well, what's your point? Well, my point is that a child, a human being, if I showed them that picture and told them, find me the odd one, they can do it. Because we have context. We're very good. What we need as people is a mechanism to have candidates to be presented to us so we can pick it off. No machine can do that, at least not for a little while in the future. What does that have to do with this? What it has to do with this is, if you didn't see any of this, and I didn't show you what this label meant and what that label meant, and I just showed you this. And I said the color is indicative of the frequency of what's going on. The darker the color, the higher the frequency. And this is a timeline. So this event happened before this event happened. And that's it. And I didn't tell you that this was threat activity, or this was system change activity, or this was network activity. And I asked you a question. I said, and I would say, did blue happen before purple? And you can build a story in your head, right? Remember the connecting the dots piece? You can see that. You can see that there was an IDS alert, and the IDS keeps alerting over and over and over again, approximately the same frequency and the time. In the meantime, you have all of these attacks at a very steady pace that are constantly coming in. And then somewhere along all this activity, your risk modifiers were changed in your system. So you know that this is something worth paying attention to. Not just based on the color, but because of the spatial relationship and the way these things happen. If I try to write a rule like this in a system, it would be compute intensive, it would be very difficult to handle. But the good news is that once you identify the pattern, you can select this one and this one and this one and this one and this one, you ought to be able to tell the system, if this happens again, I need to be alerted. Remember the alerting thing that we talked about? So now we're fusing the human's ability to build context and leveraging the machine's ability to do something that's deterministic and repeatable. That's the best of all worlds. We're not talking about trying to make machines artificially intelligent and giving people checklists, right? We're leveraging each resource the best that it can possibly be leveraged. So I want to leave you with that. I think that's like my second last slide. So I want you to think about that, and with respect to, these things are not just possible, we are doing these things. We have Splunk has thousands of customers, in my case users and colleagues, that use this strategy to defend themselves and detect attacks and close their time to response every single day across all verticals. Just about every government agency, including agencies within the state of California. Large organizations, small organizations, mom and pop shops, Fortune 100. All of these different organizations using Splunk to be able to protect themselves. And they like it so much that when they talk to Gartner or they talk to other industry analysts, we get ranked among the biggest of the biggest organizations in the world as a leader in the Magic Quadrant. Because it actually works. And because we don't come in here and tell you that you got to do all these crazy things. It's about simple things to be able to, for you to be able to get success in your organization. That's all I have. Do you have any questions for me? Come on, you gotta give me a question. I drove all the way up here. Actually, I'm lying. I took the train. But, you know, I took the train. Never mind, I love trains. But So what do you think? Do you think it makes sense? Do you think it makes sense to have a system that's able to do all of those things? So what if I told you that that system was freely available for you to download? That you can just use it, or you can use it for free. You go to Splunk.com and you can download Splunk for free. And you can use it for free for essentially an indefinite amount of time until certain other things change. That's when you have to pay for it. But I started using it for free. And I still have friends who use it for free, right?
What are some of those things that change? The number of inputs? When is it no longer free?
When you start to get to a point where you need support, when you need to have a gigantic scale set of things, and you're so big and so large that you're committing to an enterprise system, when you're ready to make that commitment, that's when it stops being free. Because then at that point you need all the other things that come with an enterprise system.
Still on the 500 megabyte per day limit?
Yes, 500 megabyte limit, which is very useful for a lot of different people, right, for a lot of different purposes. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So this would be effective regarding like insider threats as well as external threats?
This would be effective for insider threats. This would be effective for external threats. This would be effective for, and not just would be, right? We're talking as if this is a hypothetical thing. You have the customers our largest customers use it, including customers in the state of California, agencies in the state of California use it for everything from incident investigation and response, to forensics, to insider threat detection, to fraud detection, and to be able to detect unknown threats and be able to do continuous monitoring. Because it's not about, I think we kind of wrapped around this thing in an interesting way, right? People have told us, oh, you want to do this thing, you need this kind of system. You want to do that thing, you need that kind of system. But it's not about the system, it's about the approach, right? We want to be able to bring in the data. I'll share a story with you, and it relates to the point of cost as well. When I bought Splunk, and this was a long time ago, at that time, Splunk had fewer people in the company than there were people in this room, and Splunk was not a public corporation with Fortune 100 customers. It was my group's job to find threats in the future and to find solutions for those threats, and we built a lot of those solutions, but our big mantra was we don't compete with industry, so we spent a lot of time studying the market space. Taking a very long way to answer your question. I went to my bosses and I said, I need to buy this thing, and I need a sizable dollar amount to be able to do this effectively. And they said, you're crazy. This is a company somewhere out in the garage, and you want to spend money, and you want to put this into operation, and you know where you are. You're at a weapons laboratory. You want to do that? And we said yes, because this strategy makes sense. And they said, well, we don't really believe you. So I said, all right, so we'll try it out. So the first two sets of data that we brought into Splunk was our firewall information, and firewall was managed by the network operations guys, completely separate group. And we brought in email information. Remember I talked about email in the example. We brought in email information because email was managed by the security guys. The security guys and network operations guys don't always talk to each other. Matter of fact, they don't like each other because one's always hammering on the other to do something, and it kind of goes both ways. The interesting thing that happened was a firewall guy picked up his phone after looking at some events in Splunk and called the security guy, and he said, email doesn't work this way. The security guy said, what do you mean email doesn't work this way? And he said, he saved his Splunk search, he copied the link, and he sent it to the security guy right while he was on the phone, and he says, look at event number 1. This is an initial request. This request is wrong because the ports are reversed. And the guy said, well, this is the mail server. He says, yes, that's my point. And he says, look at event number 3, 4, 5. Those are regular emails, and that's how it's supposed to look. So immediately you had these two guys who rarely ever talk to each other have a point of convergence where they both feel that they're making a contribution to the organization. And they're doing it in real time. Where you can make an argument that it's a collaborative environment. We didn't even talk about collaboration, right? I'm not a sales guy, but the point is people are doing that. And so the idea is to say, can you use this system for this thing or for the other thing? It's about the methodology, it's about the approach that it enables, because the same person can look at something and it means different things to different people. But when you bring those two people together and they're able to look at the same thing at the same time, that's where the value comes in for your organization. And when we're talking about security, that's where we're able to shrink the time from the 229 days, that's 7.5 months, which is crazy, to a much shorter time window, because you can get more eyes on the problem on the same data at the same time, rather than saying, oh, I'll get you that thing. I'll share another example. We used to call it, because we were government guys, right? We had to invent academic things. So we would say it's called lowering the cost of exploration. It sounds really sexy. So, right? And so what does that mean? Have you ever had a hunch, right? You're working, you see something, and you have a hunch. You think, look, this looks weird. Right? How many people in the room have had that experience? You see something that's not right. And how many of us have had the experience that when we start pulling on the thread, we get to a point where we go, oh, man. Right? And this, and I have to go ask for permission for that, and then I have to go talk to John, and I'm going to say, John, can you give me that information? And John's going to say, we have to wait till Monday, and Sally's not there because it was off. And it's, oh, forget it. And you do that like twice. And the third time you say, man, that's odd. And you go, oh, last time I did that, it took me 7 hours. I didn't get anywhere. My boss got upset because I was here late. Right? Anybody have that experience? So that's a very high cost of applying human intuition, your context. You know something's wrong, but you can't apply it. So when we say lowering the cost of exploration, this is what we mean. What if you wanted to pull on a piece of information and you can pivot from one event to another event, just like the connect the dots example? You could just do that. Well, Splunk allows you to do that. Splunk allowed us to do that. We got great success from our organization in using Splunk. Now, and for all of those things, for IT operations, because it was the same data, for security, because it was the same data, for security research, because it was the same data, for operational intelligence, because it was the same data, for business management, for investments, to figure out what we're going to buy or not buy, to measure the effectiveness of tools and technologies that we were procuring, all of those things. Because at the end of the day, it's all about having visibility into your data, being able to analyze that in an open way, in the way you want to apply the context, and then getting some result out, right? And then taking the action on that result. Sorry, that's a very long answer. Was that useful? Was that even useful? Yes. Question, yes.
So how much of this is just Splunk vanilla out of the box? How much of it is incorporating the Splunk app for enterprise security? And if it's not using the app for enterprise security, what does that buy you? How that is?
What you see here in this chart, where you can bring in all the data, you can store the raw events, you can do all this magic, and you can have APIs and SDKs and developer platform and all those things. This is core Splunk. This is what you download. If you free download www.splunk.com, this is what you get. The Splunk app for enterprise security is what gives you some of these other pieces as pre-built, pre-packaged content. What is your name? Dylan. The question Dylan asked was, how much of this is out of the box Splunk, and how much of that is Splunk app for enterprise security? So for those of you who don't know, obviously Dylan's looked into this a little bit. The Splunk app for enterprise security is a set of content, prepackaged dashboards, views, alerts. We talked about monitoring and alerting and all those things. It's a prepackaged set of things that's already there, so you can drop it in. And you can start using it immediately. That's the purpose of enterprise, the Splunk app for enterprise security. And so Dylan was asking, well, what is out of the box and what requires the Splunk app for enterprise security? And the answer is all of this is out of the box. It's all there. What's layered on top of it are some of these things that are pre-built dashboards and reports. They are part of this Splunk app for enterprise security. And not everybody needs that, but a lot of people use it because it helps serve it.
So for your free download, do you collect any data from organizations that download it and use it?
Yes. It could be any data. It could come from a network source. It could come from a syslog somewhere. It could be a file. It could connect to a database.
No, I'm saying, do you guys collect data?
Oh, we don't collect anything. I really appreciate you asking that question if you were thinking that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no, this is yours. You download it, you install it, it's on your system. There's even a mechanism to do it in the cloud, but we as Splunk, as the organization, we have no clue what's going on or what you're using it for. About the only way that we learn anything is when you call us and you want to know about something, or you tell us, hey, I want to have this kind of a feature. That's when we have that conversation to say, what are you doing, how are you doing it, help us understand the engineering problem. But we have no idea what you're storing in there, or how you're even using it. I really appreciate you asking that question if you were thinking that. Thank you. Yes?
I just might want to mention what happens if you exceed your daily limit and how the system responds to that. This is that they understand.
Sure.
I'm in free for it.
So are you a current Splunk user?
I have in the past, and we kept hitting that limit, and my price did at that time, it was just nothing we could afford.
So I don't know how long ago your experience was,
About
but I'm sorry?
About 5 years ago.
5 years ago, yeah. So you're even an early Splunker than I am. That's pretty awesome. What happens when you exceed your daily limit is at that time you get a warning, and if you exceed your limit for five times in a 30-day consecutive window, right? What ends up happening is you can no longer do the searching. You can continue to collect, and that's important. So think about it from the perspective of perhaps a credit card. If you have a limit of a certain dollar amount and you exceed that limit, maybe the credit card provider will let you slide for 1 time or 2 times. But after that, they won't let you charge, but you can call them and get your limit extended, or you can call them and have the hold removed. So that's what happens, is that if you do exceed your limit and you find yourself that you're continually exceeding the limit, you have one of 2 options. You can extend your license volume for Splunk, Or you can have us unlock it and we'll help you figure out why is it that all of a sudden when you planned on consuming so much, that all of a sudden your consumption has gone over. One of the things that we learned when that's happened in the past, well, two things. One is someone turned something on and they were not supposed to be turning on, and they were ingesting that information, so it was an operational risk. Or the other one is that they had an attack of some kind, where one of their major sources of data just lit up. It's almost like if you have a little kid on the side of the street who's watching people go by, and every time something bad happens, he yells. Well, an IDS is kind of like that. It sees a lot of things going bad, it's constantly yelling, and we're constantly collecting information. Answer your question?
Yeah, I know that I kind of got frustrated with it at the time, so if you understand it, you set your sources to stay within that limit, you're good. But like I said, if you set up too many sources, or like you said, one of them suddenly takes off, and suddenly you just can't access it, it can be frustrating.
Anybody else? Sir?
So what type of, what type of training is available for Splunk as far as, is there like in-house classes? Is there how-to guides that are provided for free as well? To get our technicians up to speed if they were.
So this concept of openness, in terms of, I keep saying you need visibility, you need to bring more data in. We don't just apply that to our product, we apply that to the way we operate as a business. All of our documentation, there's no secret hidden documentation. All of our documentation is available online, and you can see it without even logging in. So anyone in the world can get access to any of the documentation for any of the products, same documentation that we use. So that's one way of learning things. The other thing that we have is we have a website called answers.splunk.com. And on that website, people post questions and people answer questions. So we have a big community of users, including ourselves, the folks internal to Splunk, so that you can, and in many cases, questions are answered within minutes. So that also serves as a training mechanism where you can go and learn about a particular problem or a particular solution. We also have an IRC channel, there are a lot of people logged into that. But from a formal perspective, we have a whole curriculum of education where for beginning users, so if you're a business person, for example, you only need to learn maybe how to make some dashboard or take advantage of things and export some data or import something for one-time uses and so on. If you want to do that, there's classes ranging for that, all the way to a certification program where you, even as a customer, can get certified as a Splunk support professional. So you can imagine the depth of information that is shared across that whole spectrum. So there's a formal training program to be able to do that. We can do training in-house, so we'll come to you to train, or we can do training online, so that you can attend, but in-person training and online also with an instructor in labs and so on. Okay, there's
So how much of the correlation component is defined by Splunk versus the end user of the system? So I know one of the big struggles with anything that does correlation is defining what to correlate on. Most people that are setting those up really have no idea, what I should be looking for example. And, for device A plus device B plus device C within this time range plus this red information, is that kind of predefined out of the box, or is most of that left up to,
In the Splunk app for enterprise security, a whole bunch of that information is predefined out of the box so that you have a way of getting a handle on it immediately. The important thing to note about that, though, is you can still extend that system very easily. And by easily, I mean really easily. You don't have to be a database administrator or have any knowledge of the syntax, because there's a guided mechanism by which you can say, I'm interested in malware attacks, and I want to know when they exceed a certain threshold, or when they only impact organizations in finance, or whatever, right? And you can sort of guide your way through the system and create the correlation searches very, very quickly. But all of the models and all the things that you leverage are already built in there for you to be able to leverage very quickly. And there are existing things for things like that. I showed a dashboard earlier that had a bunch of different things on there. And so all of that information is already there. There's a lot of correlation there. But if you want to extend it, or if you want to do something different, or you want to tune it, there's very easy ways of doing that. Okay. My time is up. I'll be hanging out at our Splunk booth outside. And I'm happy to answer any other questions. I have other colleagues here, John Brewer and some others, who would be happy to answer questions. Thanks for it.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.